We have finally come to the New Testament. You knew that we would get there if you waited long enough. So I hope that you will open your Bibles in the next few moments to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. This talk has the rather, frankly, amazing theme, the God who becomes a human being. It presupposes that this God keeps telling us that he's coming. In one sense, he comes to Abraham and calls him on his pilgrimage. He comes to Moses and gives him a certain task. He comes to David and establishes a dynasty. In the Old Testament, through large numbers of the books of the prophets that I've alluded to, but we haven't really looked closely to any one of them, God is repeatedly said to come. He sometimes comes with judgment. People speak of the day of the Lord, the time when the Lord comes, the day of the Lord. Oh, it'll be wonderful when the Lord comes. And God says, no, when I come, the day of the Lord is going to be full of darkness, not light. There's going to be judgment. So sometimes God comes not only upon his covenant people with judgment, but the God of the Bible is the God of all the nations. So he holds all the nations to account. Righteousness exalts a people, but sin is a reproach to any people in the Bible. So God promises to come and visit the Babylonians with judgment, or the pagan cities of Tyre and Sidon with judgment, and so forth. And he also comes to his own covenant people with judgment. But he also keeps promising to come with forgiveness, with the ultimate Davidic king, with transformation. We saw one of those passages briefly in the prophecy of Isaiah, chapter 9, words that we're familiar with from Handel's Messiah, from nowhere else, when ultimately there is a king coming who will reign on David's throne. The increase of his kingdom will never end, and he'll also be called the mighty God, the everlasting Father. Then there are other passages where you get this anticipation of someone who comes who is God. God is coming. And yet he's tied somehow to this Davidic figure. One of the most remarkable passages in this respect is by another prophet, the prophet Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 34, the prophet Ezekiel, who's writing at the beginning of the 6th century BC, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Now that does not mean the people who keep the sheep literally, but the rulers, the nobles, the monarchs as they come and go, the leaders, the priests. Prophesy against the shepherds of Israel who only take care of yourselves. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. And then what God says, in many different ways, through verse after verse after verse, is this: I will not only judge the false shepherds, I will become the shepherd of my people. This is what the sovereign Lord says, verse 10. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable. I will remove them from tending the flock. And then he goes on to say, verse 12, as shepherds look after their scattered flocks when they are with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries. I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel. I will tend them in good pasture. I myself will tend my sheep. I will have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost. I will bring back the strays. In other words, all these false shepherds are just ruining the flock. I myself will be their shepherd. And then after saying this again and again and again, about 25 times, God himself is going to shepherd his people. He's going to come. He's going to do the job himself. He then says, verse 23, I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. So somehow this promise of God himself coming and a Davidic king coming get merged into one. So when we come to the New Testament, the 4 first books of the New Testament are often called Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all begin a little differently, but they all begin in some way with the coming of Jesus. Before him, there is always mention of John the Baptist, who points out who Jesus is. And then Luke's Gospel, for example, depicts an angelic visitation to Mary, promising her a virginal conception, a miraculous thing, such that the child born in her would be called the Son of God. And then in chapter 2 of that book, the familiar Christmas story. In Matthew's Gospel, the thing is looked at less from Mary's perspective and more from Jesus' perspective, and more from Joseph's perspective. Mary was betrothed to Joseph, and then he discovers she's got pregnant. Don't forget that in that society, they couldn't go off somewhere in the corner and have a little chit-chat, and she could try and convince him it was a miracle. You didn't have that kind of easy, free conversation. There were chaperones and guardians around all the time. But God visited Joseph as well and insisted that this was his doing. She was a virgin. And Joseph, when the baby came, was to give the baby the name Jesus. Jesus is simply the Greek form of Joshua. And Joshua means Yahweh saves. That is the name of God in the Old Testament, connected to I am who I am. God saves. And you are to give this baby the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. That's already in the first chapter of Matthew. Chapter 1, verse 21. Which means, in a sense, the whole rest of the book of Matthew, the first gospel, is to be read as the gospel in which Yahweh saves his people from their sins. That's what Jesus does.